You're in my ready room, sweetheart, and you're standing on my deck like it owes you something. Do you think you matter here?" Gunnery Sergeant Boyd Hargrave said it the way a man says a thing he has said before and enjoyed every time. He said it across the duty desk, over the open certification log, with the flat of his hand already moving to sweep the visitor's tablet, an inch to the left, off the paper, off his paper. The ready room of a Marine strike fighter squadron at mid-morning is a hard room. Steel chairs bolted in rows, a duty board the color of a winter sky, the smell of jet fuel that has soaked into the deck for 30 years and will never come out, and under it, coffee scorched down to tar in a pot. No one washes. Bright light through the reinforced glass. Beyond the glass, the flight line, and beyond the flight line, a blue that went all the way up. She did not answer with her voice. She answered with her stillness. The woman at the desk was in plain civilian clothes, gray slacks, a dark blouse with nothing on it, a blank visitor badge clipped at the collar, the kind the front desk hands out to contractors and salesmen and the wives of colonels. A badge that says only that someone let you in and no one is responsible for you. She had a tablet and a clipboard, and the soft, unhurried manner of a person paid to ask questions about sleep and stress and how many hours the aircrew had flown that week. The group had been told a human factors researcher was coming. Everyone had decided she was furniture the moment she walked in, and Hargrave had decided it hardest, because Hargrave decided everything about who was furniture and who was not, and had run this deck on that decision for 4 years. He was a big man, thick through the chest and the neck, a maintenance and ordnance chief who had learned, in his 4 years owning this space, that the deck ran on whether people were afraid of him, and that most of them were. He was good with his hands, and better with a room. He knew which captain owed him, and which lieutenant would fold, and which sergeant would back his play, and he arranged the weather of the ready room the way a smaller, meaner man arranges furniture, so that he was always at the head of it. She let the tablet be pushed. She watched it slide. Then she laid one hand flat on the open page of the certification log, fingers spread, palm down, the way you might lay a hand on the flank of an animal to feel whether it was breathing, and she read. "Load sheet 3, block 4, she said. "You've certified a full weapons load on that airframe, against technical manual paragraph 11-6. 11-6 was superseded 18 months ago. The current paragraph is 11-6 alpha, and it requires a second arming circuit continuity check by a separate qualified inspector before you sign. There's no second check logged. There's no second inspector." Her voice was quiet and level and did not rise at the end. "So the signature's ahead of the work." For a half-second, the ready room's low chatter thinned. A couple of the junior pilots in the steel chairs looked up from their knee boards. At the back, near the coffee, a lean man with a major's oak leaf and a squadron patch worn pale from washing lifted his eyes from a mission card and did not lower them again. Hargrave heard only the insolence. A civilian with a clipboard telling him his paperwork was ahead of his work was not a discrepancy. It was a challenge, in front of his pilots, in his room, and the room was the one thing he never let anyone take. He backhanded her. It was not a shove, and it was not a slap meant to warn. It was the back of a heavy hand across the cheekbone, delivered with the shoulder, the kind of blow that turns a head. Her head turned. She rocked a quarter step to the side, one foot finding the deck, and a red bloom rose along the cheekbone where the knuckles had landed. And that was all. She did not lift a hand. She did not step back. She did not touch her own face. She came back to center the way a plumb line comes back to center, without drama, without hurry, and her hand was still flat on the log. Hargrave laughed. He turned to the room for the laugh back, the way he always turned, because the laugh back was the whole point, the tax the room paid him. "See?" he said. "Nothing. The clipboard people never have anything." Most of the room gave him the small, sick laugh that fear gives. Not all of it. First Lieutenant Dominic Voss, 25, call sign Ledger, 3 chairs from the front, did not laugh. He had gone very still, a young man's face working through something he did not have a name for yet, the way you go still when you have just watched a line get crossed and understood that everyone around you is going to pretend it wasn't. And at the back, the major with the pale patch had set his mission card down on the coffee table with a care that did not match the room, and he was looking at the woman's hand on the log and at the way she had taken the blow, and something in the back of his memory had turned over once, like an engine trying to catch. The red print of a hand sat on a face that had not moved, and one flat hand still rested on the page. Counting. The squadron readiness board hung on the forward bulkhead, a grid of tail numbers and status blocks and grease pencil scrawl, updated by whoever last touched it and trusted by everyone. In a good squadron, it is the most honest object in the building. In this one, it was a painting, and the woman in the gray slacks had come 2,000 miles to find out whether it was a painting, and she had known the answer in 90 seconds. She walked to it. No one told her she could. She simply rose from the duty bench, unhurried, the red mark going to a deeper color on her cheek, and crossed to the board and read it the way she had read the log, top to bottom in a single sweep, her eyes moving in a pattern that had nothing to do with the faces in the room and everything to do with the aircraft. She read the board the way other people read a sentence, not letter by letter, but whole, taking the shape of it, and finding the one word that did not belong. She stopped on a tail number in the second column. "That one's boarded green," she said, to no one and to everyone. "It's carrying an open arming circuit gripe. Code 840. An 840 is a hard down code until it's cleared and signed by maintenance control. It shouldn't be on the board as up. Somebody moved it up without moving the paper." She had said it without checking a note. She had named the code by ear, the way a mechanic hears a bearing going or a musician hears a string a hair flat, and the certainty in it made a young maintenance marine near the board go to his own clipboard without being asked. He found it. He looked up, and his face said he had found it, and he looked at Hargrave, and then he looked away from Hargrave, which told the woman more about the deck than the board had. She had learned to read a squadron the way she read an aircraft, not by what it said about itself, but by the small, involuntary motions, the flinches, the glances that went to one man before they went to the truth. On a healthy deck, a Marine who finds a discrepancy sings it out, loud, proud, because catching the thing is the job, and catching the thing is honored. On this deck, the young Marine had found the thing, and then checked, first, whether he was allowed to have found it. That single glance told her the standard was not being broken by one man. It was being broken by a whole room that had learned not to look. Major Elliot Sackett timed it. He did not mean to. It was a habit older than his rank, and he found himself counting the seconds between the moment her eyes reached the board and the moment she put her finger on the one thing wrong with it, and the number he got was small enough to make the coffee go cold in his hand. He had seen a board read like that exactly once in his life. He had been a lieutenant then, sitting in the back of a weapons and tactics briefing, watching an instructor walk a room of the best pilots in the Marine Corps through their own mistakes without once raising her voice, walking them through a night, a fault, a name. And he had come out of that briefing knowing 2 things: that he wanted to fly the way she talked, and that he never wanted to be the reason a woman like that had to give a briefing like that again. Hargrave covered. It was what he did. "Code was cleared verbally," he said. "Maintenance control passed it this morning. Board's right." The woman turned from the board to the log and laid her hand flat on it again, One line, then the line under it, her palm covering the signature block, the way a card player covers a hand. "Cleared verbally," she said. "Then there's a signature for the clearance, with a time and an inspector. Show me the signature." There was no signature. Everyone in the room who understood the paperwork understood in that moment that there was no signature, and that the woman with the clipboard had known there would be no signature. Before she asked, because she had already read the whole log, and she was not asking to learn anything. She was asking so that the room would learn it with her. She asked the way a teacher asks a question she already knows the answer to, not to be told, but so the telling would happen out loud, in front of everyone, where it could not be taken back. Sackett set his coffee down. Once before, a long time ago. He kept the thought where it was and did not let it up into his face, but his eyes had not left her, and he had begun, without deciding to watch her the way you watch a thing you are afraid you already recognize. Hargrave was not a stupid man, which made him dangerous. He understood that he could not win the argument about the log, so he stopped having the argument about the log and started having a different argument, the one he always won, the one about who belonged. "The clipboard's lost," he announced to the room, and there was warmth in it, an invitation. "The clipboard thinks she's maintenance control." A couple of his people picked it up. It became a thing then, the way these things become things, in a closed room where one man sets the weather. A nickname passed hand to hand. "The clipboard," said with a grin, said over her head. A small machine for making a person into a joke, so that nothing the person says has to be heard. He was good at it. It was the same tool as the backhand, only quieter, and it left no red mark for anyone to have to explain later. She let it happen. She sat back down on the duty bench with her tablet, and to anyone watching, she was a civilian filling out a form, thumbing through screens, tapping fields, a researcher doing her small, harmless research, while the real people ran the real squadron around her. She was not filling out a form. She was photographing pages. Every time the certification log lay open on the desk, and a Marine turned a page to sign or to check, she captured it. The load sheets, the clearance blocks, the signatures, and her thumb moved across the glass with the same economy her whole body had. No motion wasted, nothing that read as anything, and page by page, the tablet filled with signature blocks. And the thing about the signature blocks, the thing she saw before anyone else could have seen it, was that they were all the same hand, certifications that were supposed to come from 3 different qualified inspectors across 2 weeks, all carried the same slant, the same pressure, the same tired flourish on the same letter. One man had signed all of it. One man had signed for work. 3 men were supposed to check, and some of the work had not been done. And the aircraft that carried that work flew with ordnance, and with aircrew, and with young men's daughters' photographs taped where they could see them. Across the room, Voss got up. He crossed to the coffee, poured 2 cups, and brought one to the bench, and set it down beside her without a word, and stood there a second longer than a man just delivering coffee would stand. "You flagged 8:40 right," he said, low, not looking at her, looking at the board. "For what it's worth, I've had a feeling about that log for a month. I didn't have the words for it." He paused. "I didn't have the nerve for it either." "You brought coffee across a room that didn't want you to," she said. "That's the nerve. The words come after." She let him take that with him. "Thank you, Lieutenant." He went back to his chair. It was a small thing, and it cost him, in that room, on that deck, and both of them knew it. You know a person like her. Maybe you have been in a room where the loudest man decided you did not count, and you sat with it because the loud man held something you needed, and speaking cost more than swallowing. If a story about someone who is written off and does not flinch is a story you want to see all the way through, take 1 second and subscribe, because the part where the room learns what it was looking at is coming, and it is worth staying for. Her tablet filled with signatures that all belonged to the same hand. She set it face down on her knee and folded her hands over it, and waited, still as the deck itself, and watched the clock on the forward bulkhead sweep toward noon. Hargrave had decided she needed to be gone before she read anything else, and he was a man who solved problems with paper as readily as with his hands. He went to the squadron duty officer's desk and filed a security write-up. An unescorted civilian visitor, loose in a controlled area, wandering the flight line spaces, touching maintenance records, a liability, a badge that ought to be pulled. He wrote it in the flat, aggrieved language of a man protecting his command from an intruder, and he brought it to the duty officer to sign, and the duty officer, a nervous captain who owed Hargrave a dozen small favors, read it and did not want to sign it, and reached for the pen anyway. There was a young Marine at the ordnance clerk's desk in the corner, Corporal Tess Ardley, 22, who had gone very small in her chair while Hargrave wrote. She was the one who kept the log current at his direction. She was the one whose initials were supposed to be on half the second inspector blocks, and were not, because he had told her, months ago, in the reasonable voice men like him use for the thing that will one day sink you, that the checks were fine, that he had done them himself, that all she had to do was keep the sheet moving so the numbers stayed up and nobody upstairs got excited. She had known it was wrong. She had also known what happened to corporals who told gunnery sergeants their paperwork was wrong, and she had chosen, every day for months, to keep the sheet moving. She watched him carry the write-up to the duty officer now, and she felt the months press down on her all at once. The woman on the bench read the write-up upside down. She read it across 6 feet of ready room air, inverted in the time it took the captain to uncap the pen, and she spoke without getting up. Instruction 5520, she said. The one you're citing. It requires that any escort of a visitor in a controlled area be logged, by name, on arrival, with times. If I was unescorted in a controlled space, that's a finding against the escort of record. Your escort log for this morning is on the clipboard on that hook. She lifted her chin a half-inch toward a clipboard hanging by the hatch. It's empty. Same page as your load clearances. She laid a flat hand on the bench beside her, palm down, as if setting the empty column there for them all to see. You can pull my badge, but the same instruction you're using to pull it says somebody was supposed to be standing next to me all morning, and nobody was. And that's on the log, or it's on you. Either way, it's a finding, and either way, it's in your own handwriting. The captain with the pen stopped. He looked at the write-up, and he looked at the empty escort clipboard, and he did the arithmetic that frightened men do, weighing which of 2 large men would remember this longest, and he set the pen down, and then picked it up again, because Hargrave was standing over him. Flag the badge, Hargrave said. Pull it at noon. She can make her complaint to somebody who cares. He looked at the woman and smiled. That's an hour. Enjoy your hour. She did not look worried. That was the thing that reached Sackett across the room and would not leave him. A civilian whose access is about to be stripped, who has been struck in the face and mocked and written up, looks worried, or angry, or afraid. And she looked like a person watching weather come in over water. A person who has already read the sky and knows exactly how long she has, and exactly what she is going to do with it. She had an hour. She looked like the hour was plenty. In the corner, Corporal Ardley looked at that unworried face and felt, for the first time in months, something that was almost hope and almost terror, and was, in the end, both. Noon on the bulkhead clock, a countdown now, red and simple. and the one man in the room, watching her closely, found that the countdown did not comfort him at all. Sackett went out to the passageway where the signal was better and made a call he could not have explained to anyone. He had pulled the controlling document for the weapons loading certification standard, the standard the whole group flew by, the one that governed every signature block Hargrave had been faking, and he had gone looking for the name of the officer who wrote it, and the name was not there. The authoring officer line was protected, redacted, a gray bar where a name should be, the way names are protected when the person who earned the byline would rather the work spoke and the name stayed quiet. But he had read the standard's opening paragraph, and the paragraph had a cadence to it, a plain, hard economy, one idea per sentence, no adjective that did not carry weight, and he had heard that cadence before in a briefing room from an instructor with a call sign years ago, when he was young enough to want to be someone. He read further. The standard's preface said, in the flat language of official documents, that it had been written in response to a mishap, and it gave no name for the mishap either, but it gave a date, and the date sat in Sackett's chest like a stone, because he had been at the wing that year, and he remembered the quiet that had come down over the community when a section had come back, one aircraft short, and the reason had turned out to be a signature that stood for work no one had done. He called a mentor at the wing, a colonel he trusted, and he described the woman without naming her because he had no name to give. The stillness, the way she read a board, the blow she took without moving, the standard she seemed to carry in her mouth like her own teeth, the flat hand she laid on every line. The colonel was quiet on the line for a while, long enough that Sackett checked the screen to see if the call had dropped. "Elliot," he said finally, "if she's who you're starting to think she is, get out of her way and let it happen. Don't help her. Don't warn her. Don't warn anyone. Just be standing up when it does." "Who is she, sir?" "You already know," the colonel said, "or you wouldn't have called me. You've known since she took that hit and didn't move. Nobody stands like that who hasn't already stood through the worst thing there is." A breath on the line. "Go back inside, Major. And when the moment comes, be on your feet before you think about it. That's the only thing she'll ever ask of you, and she won't even ask." He stood in the passageway a moment after the line went dead, the phone still in his hand, and let himself understand the shape of what the colonel had refused to say. There was only one officer whose name would be redacted off the front of that standard. There was only one instructor who briefed the way the standard read, who laid a hand flat on a chart as though the chart could feel it. And there was only one reason a woman like that would fly 2,000 miles to stand in a stranger's ready room in gray slacks and let a gunnery sergeant call her furniture. To find out, with her own eyes, whether the thing she had bled to build was real, when the only person watching was the kind of man who would never know she was watching back. He thought about the young lieutenant he had been in that briefing, and about the promise he had made himself walking out of it, and he felt the promise come due. Sackett went back inside. The woman was where he had left her, on the bench, hands folded over the face-down tablet, watching the clock. As he watched, she reached out one more time to the certification log where it lay open on the desk, laid her flat hand across a signature block, moved it to the next, counting. The same gesture he had now seen a dozen times, and the memory that had been trying to catch all morning finally caught. And it was not the face, and it was not the voice. It was the hand. He had seen that hand lie flat on a chart in a ready room a decade ago while a woman explained to a room full of men who thought they were the best in the world exactly how one of them had almost died, and why, and what they would all do differently forever so that it would not happen again. She had laid her hand on the chart the way you lay a hand on a grave. If you have been holding your breath waiting for the moment the room finds out, it's close now. Subscribe so you don't lose the thread before it lands, because what happens when this room stands up is the whole reason the story exists. Sackett sat down slowly because his legs had decided to before he did, and he understood at last who was sitting on the duty bench of his ready room, taking a beating from a man who signed his own name 3 times and called it inspection. She was alone now, in the way she counted alone even in a full room, and because this is the one place the story can go inside her head, it will. 2014. A night strike over black water. No moon, the kind of dark that has weight. Her call sign then and now. Vesper. She was section-led, 33 years old. 4 aircraft strung out on a run-in with the target still minutes away, and the whole thing was going the way good missions go, which is to say, quietly, professionally, everyone doing the small correct things in the correct order. The radio net a low murmur of routine calls. Her wingman was Captain Miles Kerrigan, 29. A better stick than he thought he was, a worse singer than he thought he was, a man who kept a photograph of his daughter taped where he could see it in the cockpit, and who had, that week, been counting the days to his own daughter's 2nd birthday out loud to anyone who would listen. 19 days, he'd told her at the brief, grinning, 19 days, and he'd be home for it. His aircraft carried a fault in an arming circuit that had not been logged, a continuity check that should have been done twice by 2 separate qualified inspectors, had been done once, or once badly, or signed for and not done at all. The board had said the airframe was up, and the log had said the work was complete, and the paper had said everything was fine, and the paper was a painting. The fault chose the worst moment, the way faults do, not on the ground, not on the deck, but out over the water in the dark with weapons live and no margin anywhere. She heard it happen in his voice before the instruments told her, the small change in a man's breathing when the aircraft stops being an aircraft and starts being a problem he cannot solve. She did everything there was to do. She talked to him the whole way, steady, low, the way she talked about everything. And she would spend years learning the exact sequence, and it would never get easier. And none of it was enough, because the failure had been built into the airframe on the ground, weeks before, by a signature. She brought the rest of the flight home. She could not bring Kerrigan home. There is a kind of quiet on a radio net after, a quiet that is louder than any noise, and she flew through it with her hands doing the right things and her whole self, somewhere out over the water where the aircraft had gone in. She landed. She walked to the ready room. She sat down. And 19 days later, somewhere, a little girl had a 2nd birthday, and Vesper was the one who had to make sure that what happened to that little girl's father never had a chance to happen again. The Board of Inquiry took months, and she sat through all of it, and the finding, when it came, was a sentence she could have written herself and would spend the rest of her career making sure other people had to read. The aircraft had been lost to a maintenance fault that the paperwork said had been checked, and the paperwork was wrong, and no single human being had lied so much as a whole system had agreed, quietly, over time, that the 2nd check was a formality, and the 2nd signature was a courtesy. No one had meant to kill Miles Kerrigan. That was the horror of it, and the lesson of it both. The chain that killed him was made entirely of small conveniences, each one reasonable, each one signed by a decent person in a hurry, and the sum of the small conveniences was a young man in the water and a photograph of a 2-year-old going dark on a cockpit panel. She had learned in that inquiry that evil is rarely the thing that kills your people. Convenience is the thing that kills your people. And a standard is nothing more than a wall you build across the path convenience wants to take. She did not drink it away, and she did not rage. She sat down afterward with the mishap board and the maintenance data and the human factors people, and she took the thing apart until she understood it all the way to the bottom. Every link in the chain, every place a human being had touched it, and a human being had failed it. And then she wrote. She authored the Aircrew Safety and Weapons Loading Certification Standard the Marine Corps aviation community adopted the following year, 22 pages, in plain, hard language, one idea per sentence. The requirement that certain checks be done by separate qualified inspectors, that each signature mean a separate human being had put eyes and hands on the work, that no one man could ever again sign 3 times and call an aircraft ready. Every signature block Boyd Hargrave gun-decked existed because of Miles Kerrigan. Every rule the gunny found inconvenient, every second inspector he decided he did not need, every check he decided he could sign for from memory had been written into being at 3 a.m. by a woman who could still hear the net go quiet. That was why she had come 2 days early, and quiet, and in gray slacks with a blank badge. Not to inspect. An inspection is announced, and an announced deck is a clean deck. To see, to stand in an ordinary ready room as an ordinary nobody, and find out whether the thing she had bled to build was being honored when no colonel was watching. It was not. And she had known within 90 seconds that it was not, and she had stayed all morning anyway, and taken the backhand, and let herself be called the clipboard, for one reason. She wanted the room to see it too. A rule that only a colonel can enforce is not a rule. It is a favor. She had not written a favor. She had written a standard, and a standard has to hold in a room where the only authority present is a gunnery sergeant with a heavy hand, or it does not hold at all. Noon came up on the bulkhead clock, and with it came Hargrave, because a man like Hargrave cannot let a countdown pass without being the one to end it. "Time's up, clipboard," he said. "Badge is pulled. You're off my deck." She did not move fast enough for him. She did not move at all, in fact, only looked up from the clock with that same unhurried attention, and laid her flat hand one last time on the log open beside her, on a fresh signature block, counting. And so he did the thing that ended him, and he did it in front of every witness in the room. He reached down, closed his hand around her upper arm, and hauled her up off the bench, hard, meaning to walk her to the hatch and put her out. She let him. That was the part no one watching could understand, until later. She let him take her arm and pull her up, offered no resistance, came up off the bench as he lifted her, and as she came up, her sleeve slid back along her forearm, and for one full second, in the bright light through the reinforced glass, the small tattoo on the inside of her forearm showed, a squadron insignia, worn and faded to the blue of old ink, and beneath it, in letters no larger than a thumbnail, a single word. She let it show. She could have turned her wrist. She had turned it away from him all morning, without seeming to, the way she did everything. And now, coming up off the bench in his grip, she let the wrist roll open to the room. She wasn't a woman who let things happen to her. Everything that had happened in that room all morning she had allowed, because each thing he did was another line in a case she was building out of his own hands. And this last thing, his fingers locked on a senior officer's arm in front of 30 witnesses, was the line she had been waiting for since 90 seconds after she walked in. And with his hand still locked around her arm, with the whole room's eyes on her because a big man had just yanked a small woman to her feet, she reached out with her free hand, laid it flat on the log rack by the hatch, read the last signature block on the topmost sheet, and said in a voice pitched for the room, "One more. Same hand? Thank you, Gunny." Then she smiled at him. It was the first time. It was not a warm smile, and it was not cruel. It was the smile of a person to whom a great gift has just been given. freely in front of witnesses. And Boyd Hargrave, who had spent 4 years learning to read fear on faces, looked at that smile and felt the deck move under him for the first time, because he had just laid hands on her in front of 30 people, and some part of him, the animal part that keeps men alive, understood. A half-second before his mind did that he had made a terrible mistake. At the back of the room, the major with the pale patch was already on his feet. Major Elliot Sackett had seen the tattoo. He did not shout. There was no announcement, no drama, none of the theater the moment might have had in a lesser room. He simply came to attention, heels together, spine straight, chin level, hands flat along his trouser seams. The way a Marine comes to attention when the reason for it is beyond argument. And his eyes were fixed on the woman Hargrave still held by the arm, first on the faded ink of her forearm, then on her face. And he said one word, and the word was a call sign, and it landed in that ready room like a round going home. Vesper. For a moment, nothing. And then it moved through the room the way a wave moves, not all at once. First the ones who understood, then the ones who saw the ones who understood, then everyone. First, Lieutenant Dominic Voss stood. The maintenance Marine by the board stood. The nervous captain with the pen stood, the write-up forgotten under his hand. In the corner, Corporal Tess Ardley rose to her feet, with tears already starting, standing for the name and standing too, for the end of the months she had carried. The junior pilots came up out of their steel chairs one after another, and then all together, and the ready room of a Marine strike fighter squadron rose to its feet without a word, without an order, without a single voice. 30 Marines standing because the woman a gunny had just backhanded and hauled off a bench was a name they had all been taught, a name in the front of the standard they flew by, a name their instructors had said the way you say the name of someone who paid for something you get to use for free. Their bodies had decided to stand before. Their minds had finished the sentence. Hargrave's hand was still on her arm. His face began to move, and the room watched it move. First the confusion. A man watching his room stand up and not understanding why, casting around for the joke, waiting for someone to laugh so he could laugh too. Then the disbelief as the call sign reached him and refused to fit the woman in the gray slacks, the clipboard, the survey lady, the nobody he had struck. Then the recognition, arriving all at once and from the bottom, the arithmetic finishing itself against his will, the standard he had been faking, the author whose name was redacted, the requirement he had spent 4 years working around, the second inspector he had decided he did not need, the flat hand on the log naming his forgeries one by one, all of it collapsing into a single point that was the woman he still, insanely, had by the arm. And then the horror, pure and total, as his fingers understood before the rest of him and began to open on their own, one at a time, as if they no longer belonged to him. There is a thing that happens in a room when everyone in it stands for a reason. None of them said out loud, and it is not like applause, and it is not like a salute drill on a parade deck. It is quieter, and it is heavier. It is the sound of 30 people agreeing, all at once and without a word, that they were wrong about something, and that they are going to be better now, and that the being better starts with getting to their feet. Voss stood the way a man stands when a weight comes off him. The maintenance Marine stood the way a man stands when he has been given permission, at last, to have found the thing. And Corporal Ardley stood the way a person stands at the end of a long fear, shaking, upright, no longer alone with what she knew. Brandt looked at none of them and saw all of them, in the sweep she always ran, and what she saw was a deck remembering what it was for. The hatch opened, Lieutenant Colonel Grant Holloway, the squadron commander, stepped in to find his entire ready room on its feet in silence, and a gunnery sergeant frozen with his hand on a civilian's arm. And Holloway had been told that morning that the incoming group commander might come through the spaces sometime that week, and he took in the room, and the standing Marines, and the faded ink, and the red mark on the woman's cheek, and his face went the color of the duty board. "Gunnery Sergeant," Holloway said, and his voice was very quiet and very hard. "Take your hand off the colonel." The word landed on Hargrave like weather. His hand came off her arm. He stepped back and kept stepping back until a steel chair stopped him, and he stood against it with nowhere left to go. The woman in the gray slacks straightened her sleeve, unhurried, and when she spoke to the room. Level. The way she had read the board, the way she had briefed a generation of pilots who were now colonels themselves. "Colonel Adeline Brandt," she said, "Marine Aircraft Group. I have the group as of Thursday. I came early because I wanted to see the deck, the way it runs when it thinks no one's looking." She let that sit one beat. "Now, I've seen it." The salute came then, from Holloway, from Sackett, from every Marine in the room who was entitled to render it, and she returned it, and only after it was rendered and returned did she reach up at last and touch the red mark on her cheek. Once, lightly, as if confirming it was still there for the record. The mark on her face was, in that moment, the only thing in the room anyone could look at. What happened after happened fast. The way these things happen fast, once the paper is on your side, instead of against you. Colonel Brandt's tablet held it all. Investigators from the wing walked through it that afternoon, with her standing at the end of the table, not gloating, not raising her voice, only laying a flat hand on each captured page as she named it. The load sheets certified against a superseded paragraph, the arming circuit clearances signed without the second check, the escort logs blank where they should have been full, and running through all of it like a watermark. The same hand, the same slant, the same tired flourish, 3 inspectors' worth of signatures written by one man who had decided that the fastest way to make an aircraft ready was to say it was. It was not laziness in the end, though it had started as laziness. It had become a small machine for turning risk into paper and paper into readiness numbers that made the gunny look like the best chief on the station, and the numbers had gone up the chain, and somewhere above him people had been pleased, and being pleased they had not asked, and not asking they had let it run. The flight safety hazard was the part that made the room go quiet. Every one of those aircraft had flown. Everyone had carried ordnance and aircrew on the strength of a check that one man swore to and hadn't made. There had not been a Kerrigan yet. That there hadn't been was luck, and luck is not a standard. And the whole reason the standard existed was so that no squadron would ever have to run on luck again. When one of the investigators said as much aloud, without knowing what he was saying or to whom, Colonel Brandt only nodded once and laid her hand flat on the table and said nothing, and the room did not understand why the nothing was so heavy. Gunnery Sergeant Boyd Hargrave was apprehended in the ready room for the assault, taken into custody quietly, without a scene, because Colonel Brandt did not want a scene, and the story did not need one. He was relieved for cause. The falsified certification scheme was referred for court-martial. There was no speech about it, no theater of consequence. A woman who had built a rule out of the worst night of her life did not need to watch a man dragged out to feel that the rule had held. She needed the rule to hold. It held. If you have made it this far, then you already know what this story is really about. And it isn't the man in handcuffs. It's the standing up. It's 30 Marines who got to their feet without being told, because somewhere down in them, they knew what they were looking at. If that landed for you, subscribe and stay for the last minute, because the last minute is the reason. There were 2 young Marines to see to, and how she handled them said more about her than the arrest did. Corporal Tess Ardley came forward on her own, before anyone came for her, and told the investigators everything. The months, the initials she had not written, the reasonable voice that had talked her into keeping the sheet moving. She expected to be finished. Colonel Brandt listened to all of it, and then told her, plainly, that a corporal who is told by a gunnery sergeant that the checks are done, and to keep the sheet moving is carrying a weight that belongs on the man who put it there. But that the moment to set it down had been every one of those mornings, and that she would answer for having waited, and that answering for it honestly, out loud, before anyone made her, was the first thing she had done right in months, and the reason she would still have a career to be careful with. It was not mercy, and it was not a pass. It was a standard, applied to a corporal exactly as it was applied to a gunny, and Ardley understood the difference and would remember it. And there was First Lieutenant Dominic Voss, the one who had not laughed, the one who had crossed a hostile room to set a cup of coffee on a bench. He was called into the commander's office the next morning, expecting the worst, the way the young always expect the worst. Colonel Brandt did not have the worst for him. She had a job. She put the certification re-audit in his hands, every signature block in the squadron, the whole tainted log, and she told him she was giving it to him because he had shown her, in a room where it was expensive to show her anything, that he could tell the difference between what was easy and what was right. He would carry that morning for the rest of his career. It would make him careful in the way that keeps other people's wingmen alive. Word of it moved through the group the way word moves, not the official version, but the real one, the one the Marines tell each other in the smoking pit and the maintenance spaces. The survey lady was the group commander. The clipboard read a board faster than maintenance control. She took a backhand from the gunny and never lifted a hand, because she was building a case out of his own knuckles. And when they stood, every one of them told it as though standing had been their idea, and in a way it had, which was exactly the point. By the end of the week, there were second inspectors signing second inspector blocks on decks 2 squadrons over, where no one had been caught and no colonel had come, because the story had reached them first, and a story that reaches a deck before a colonel does is the only kind of standard that ever really holds. Brandt had known that for 12 years. It was the whole reason she flew in gray slacks. That night the flight line was quiet, the aircraft cooling and ticking in their rows under a sky gone from blue to black, and Colonel Adeline Brandt walked it alone. At the head of the line, on the hangar wall, hung the squadron's plaques, the old boards, the deployment crests, the names of the dead the community keeps, so that the community does not forget what it is for. She stopped at one she had known would be there, because she had made it her business over the years to know where the names were kept. Captain Miles Kerrigan. She stood in front of it for a while and did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that the Standard had not already said better in 22 pages, in the plain, hard language of a woman who had learned exactly what a missing signature costs. She laid her flat hand on the wall beneath his name, the same gesture she had laid on the log all day, and held it there, counting something that had no number. Her phone lit in her pocket. A message, short, from a number that had no name attached to it, and never would. It was not a name. It was a greeting, the old kind, the kind that means the person sending it knew you before you were a colonel, and after the greeting, a single line, and the line named a place, the Horn of Africa, and a thing that was going to need doing there, soon, by someone who could read a board like second nature and take a blow without flinching and build a rule that held when no one was watching. She read it once. She looked at Kerrigan's name on the wall one more time. Then she put the phone away and walked back down the line toward the light, already in the quiet way she did everything, beginning to think about the next mission. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.